Good afternoon and welcome to the Texas Public Policy Foundation's weekly live stream, where if you have tuned in before, you know we cover the hot topics of the day. And in good Texas Public Policy Foundation fashion, we don't shy away from those difficult topics. So today we are going to tackle one of the most vexing public policy issues facing America. It profoundly affects Texas because of who we are as Texans and who we love as Texans. But for all of us in the United States, the issue of immigration policy has dominated the better part of our discussion of the last half decade, especially prior to the emergence of the COVID pandemic. And so it is a great pleasure to have as our guest today three patriots, three men who in their public service have continued to battle for bipartisanship, for getting along across party lines, across ideological lines. And I think here in 2020, where all of us, regardless of our party affiliation, regardless of our philosophical worldview, are feeling fatigued, this is going to be a welcome conversation. Doesn't mean that we're going to shy away from being candid. It doesn't mean that any of our guests are not free to say whatever is on their heart and perhaps even make some constructive criticism about the other side. But the point of today's conversation is to model for all of us how people who belong to different political parties, for that matter, might even have different worldviews, can have a productive civil discussion about one of the most challenging public policy issues facing America. And so it really is a pleasure. It's even an honor, because I respect these three men immensely, to have with us today the guests we have. Two of them current elected officials. The third, someone who served Congress. I'll introduce him, a colleague of mine here at the foundation shortly. It's a pleasure, Congressman Henry Cuellar, to have you with us today. You are known, although you're a humble guy, as the most degreed member of the United States Congress. For those of you who aren't familiar with Congressman Cuellar's background, just listen to this. His education spans from Laredo Community College to Georgetown University, all the way to the University of Texas at Austin, from which he holds a law degree and a Ph.D. in government. So from one Longhorn to another, wearing a burnt orange tie. Hook 'em, Congressman. You're a former Texas state representative, Texas Secretary of State, and you're currently in your 8th term in Congress representing Texas's 28th Congressional District. Thanks so much for making time and being with us today. We'll get to you here in just a moment. Our other guest today, for those of us in the public policy and political world in Texas, is someone we're a big fan of because of his leadership, because of the wonderful city he serves as chief executive of. He's the mayor of Congressman Cuellar's hometown of Laredo, Texas. Mayor Pete Saenz, graduate of Texas A&M Kingsville, where he earned undergraduate and graduate degrees in animal science and range management before going on to St. Mary's University School of Law in San Antonio. He's been mayor of the country's #1 inland port since 2014. So Mayor Saenz, thanks for your service to the people of Laredo and Texas, and thanks for being with us. Congressman John Hostettler served several terms in Congress. He is one of our senior staff colleagues here at TPPF. I also very happy to call him a great friend. He runs our state's trust operation in Washington, D.C., where he joins us from today. He served Indiana's 8th district as congressman and as someone who also is known as being very willing to have difficult conversations and to try to build bipartisan coalitions about what's right. So to Congressman Cuellar, Mayor Saenz, John Hostettler, thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to jump right in, gentlemen. We have several questions that I'd like to get through with you in our first half hour. And then, as our audience knows, when we get into the second part of today's episode, we'll turn to their questions. And so if you're in the audience and already know that you have a question for one of these guests or all three of them, you can go into the comment section and pose that there. Before we get to our conversation about immigration and the related challenge of border security, I'd like to ask all of you how you are managing and have managed the issue of bipartisanship, of working across party and ideological lines during what I can say, as a historian of American politics, is one of the most polarized times in America's political history. So, Mayor, I thought we would start with you, and then we'll move on to your colleagues who have served or are serving in Congress now.
Yes, to begin with, thank you so much for the invitation. I always welcome a meeting or a conversation with Congressman Henry Cuellar and, of course, Congressman Hostettler. I'm sorry, and I appreciate the opportunity here. Yes, I'm a mayor here in South Texas. As you know, a part of the South Texas is very democratic. I consider myself an independent and conservative in certain ways. Depending, I do what's best for my city, and obviously that means working with both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. We have a Republican leadership in Texas and also in Washington, as we know. And of course, I work extremely closely with Congressman Henry Cuellar. He's basically our champion here for this area. There's a lot of work that he's done, and it's very evident in what you see if you travel to Laredo and visit Laredo. Laredo is the #1 inland port. We have been for quite some time. At one time, the last few months or so, we became the #1 land port overall in the U.S. Pre-COVID, we did over $320 billion worth of trade here in Laredo, Texas alone, which speaks volumes. Of course, I'm biased. Also, we contribute to the U.S. Treasury, and again, pre-COVID, close to $700 million annually in excise fees, trade fees, whatever is involved in trade. We pride ourselves in being basically the experts in trade and commerce. Obviously, the relationship that we have with Mexico, our success is also based on what we do with Mexico and what Mexico does with us. I've said it many times. We're connected, to the hip. We're basically a community, a region. If people don't know the border, please come by and get to know the border, because it's a truly an organism. What they do over there, impacts us here and vice versa. So we need to stay very closely because we're connected economically, socially, culturally, in so many ways. When we hear rhetoric or something that impacts the border, obviously we cringe because we know it's going to directly impact the border area. That means our livelihoods here. 60, I would say easily 40-50% of our economy is driven by the Mexican shopper. And of course, the Mexican trade. Mexico is the #1 trading partner for the U.S. and for Texas as well. So we garner that position and we protect it because it means our livelihood here in the border area. So it means working with both sides. Both parties bring so much good to the area, and I try to be as neutral as I can, considering the polarization that we found ourselves in Washington and to a certain extent in Austin as well. So as a mayor, I focus on my city, and I work with whoever I need to work with to receive funds that are needed, so much needed in the border area. And that means, again, going back to our Congressman Henry Cuellar, who's been extremely helpful for many years for us, and it's evident. Thank you.
Well, Mayor, I'm grateful for your response for a number of reasons. One of them, just giving our audience who may not be familiar with Laredo a better sense of what a wonderful city it is. For those of you outside Texas, you know that the friendliest people on the planet are Texans. Probably the friendliest Texans are in South Texas, maybe in Laredo specifically. You can see that in the mayor's response. To get down to brass tacks, though, there's the serious question, which you provided great context for, about working in these hyper-polarized times in a way that's still very productive. I think most people in Congress would say that one of the people who personifies that is you, Congressman Cuellar. So I just want to give you an opportunity to explain that for our audience. Have you found from the beginning of your service in Congress to today that it's become more difficult to transcend party lines?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Roberts, again, thank you so much. And also go Longhorns, #1. And certainly it's a pleasure being with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I've known y'all since I was in the state legislature, working with Jeff and other folks there from the very beginning. I also want to thank my good friend, the mayor. Pete Saenz does a wonderful job. He's a great leader, especially very challenging times that we have right now to lead Laredo, and he is articulate. He's very knowledgeable. He does his homework, and it's always a pleasure working with my friend Pete. So Mayor, it's always a pleasure being with you. John, again, a former colleague, again, Indiana, certainly want to say thank you for your service in Congress, and, which leads us to what it is to serve under very difficult times. Let me start off what I saw. I served in the state legislature. I was Secretary of State also. And one of the things when I was there, we didn't have whips or majority whip or that type of situation in Austin. And in Austin, we also, at that time, we did what we thought was right. And it was, we usually had about 5,000 bills, about 1,000 of them would pass, and I could count on them, maybe less than 5 that would be partisan. Everything else was done bipartisan. Those were very different times. So then I got into the U.S. Congress, and I'll tell you my experience when I first got there. We had all the freshmen together. This was back in 2005, the beginning of 2005. We had a general session. They said, now we're going to go ahead and break up into sessions. And I remember there were 2 buses outside the hotel after we got that first briefing. So I got out and I started getting to the first bus because it was the closest to the door. And they said, I'm sorry, sir, but this bus is for the Republicans. The Democratic bus is over there. And all of a sudden I saw that they divided. The Democrats went this way, the Republicans went this way. So the very beginning, I started noticing that it was very, very, very different in Washington, D.C. So if they divide the incoming freshmen or member-elects into Democrats, Republicans, then you can wonder why there's such a problem with Washington, D.C. From there, I saw that almost every vote was partisan, and it was a reverse from what I saw in Texas, where out of all the bills, pretty much a lot of them were partisan, and then a few were bipartisan itself. What we heard in Washington was, hey, let's be bipartisan. But I noticed that the moment you started working with a Republican, the first thing is somebody would say, now, why are you working with that Republican? After we were told to be bipartisan. So it is a different atmosphere, a different culture up there in DC. And after so many years being up there in DC, I still carry the words that John F. Kennedy said when he said, look, there's not a Republican idea or a Democratic idea, but it's an idea that's good for the American public. And I still carry that, and I still do that, even though we see that on the Republican, on the Democrat side, where come in election time, there'll be people saying you voted too many times bipartisan or with the Republicans. And then same thing I've seen, and I've seen that with my Republican friends, where they are attacked for working with Democrats. So what we're seeing is because of redistricting and so many other factors, we're seeing that people are becoming more partisan in one way or the other. And if they feel that they're safe in their Democratic district or the Republican district, then we're seeing extremes. And unfortunately, what we see in Washington are the extremes, the far left and the far right. I know right now we're talking about certain people on the far left, but I would remind my Republican friends also that, back in 2010, we saw the Tea Party folks on the far right that were pushing the John Boehners and the Paul Ryans into certain areas. So we're seeing 2 fringes. And I still think that there's a lot of us that still want to do the right thing, and we're going to look for bipartisan solutions to get the job done. And I'll close up with this. If you elect a member, and I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican, where that member needs to answer just one question, that is, what does my party want? Then you can elect anybody. You don't need to have a free thinker. You don't need to have anybody independent, because all that person has to answer is, what does my Democratic Party want me to vote on, or what does my Republican Party want me to vote on? And if you can just answer that question, you can send anybody up here. It's hard to be bipartisan, but it is the right thing to do. And we need to have people that can look at not at Democratic ideas or Republican ideas, but ideas that will help us fulfill the purpose of our democracy and doing the right thing for the American public. So with that, I thank you for that question, which I think is probably one of the most important questions that we have is, what does it mean to be bipartisan on that? So thank you, Dr. Roberts.
Oh, yes, sir. Thanks for your response, and of course for your leadership, most of all, in that important effort. So to former Congressman Hostettler, a two-part follow-up. Number one, something about your own experience related to bipartisanship and presumably how difficult you think that is now that you're on the outside heading up our state's trust division. But then secondly, provide for us, I'm hopeful, a segue into the conversation topic of the hour, and that's immigration policy. How has this problem of polarization prevented the kind of immigration reform that apparently a majority of Americans would like to see?
Well, thank you, Kevin. And it's a blessing to be with you, and especially with Mayor Saenz and Congressman Cuellar. First of all, Mayor, it's good to be with you again. And I would just let our folks know that are viewing of your gracious hosting of those of us from Washington, D.C. and Indiana, when we visited Laredo late last year, how you took time out of your very busy schedule and speaking as a Hoosier for the first time down to the border, down to Laredo, just a wonderful visit and a beautiful city that you govern. I appreciate all of your work there. And Congressman Cuellar, it's good to see you again. Henry, Congressman Cuellar and I served one term in 2005, 2006. And I can tell you that when he first came to Congress as a freshman, it was well understood very early on that he worked for the betterment of his district, betterment of the Republic, and he was more than willing to work in a bipartisan fashion. And that still continues today, which brings me to answer the first question, Kevin, and that is, where have we come from and where are we today? I was in that Contract with America class, 1994, the first time in 40 years that Republicans took control of the House of Representatives. And there was a president at that time, William Jefferson Clinton, and a Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And quite honestly, being someone new to politics, it was very, very partisan. And quite honestly, in order to elevate my own status, I wish I could tell you that I did think it could never be as partisan, much less more partisan than what happened in 1994 and 1995 in those early years of the new Republican majority. But I've had this conversation a lot with family and friends recently, and I had to go back on that and say how difficult it appears from the outside to get anything done, and that folks like Congressman Cuellar are going to be really the solution to being able to reach across the aisle, and his Republican counterparts that are willing to likewise go in, suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, because there's a lot outrageous going on and being spoken of today when folks do that. So it's that's what it's going to have to take. And these are, I think we can say, and you mentioned it earlier, alluded to it, I think these are somewhat unprecedented times when the rhetoric is so vitriolic, coming really from both sides, that it seems difficult to get something done. And then you throw in this issue of immigration, which is possibly one of the 2 or 3 most controversial issues of our time. The others having been, to a certain extent, resolved for the time being, you might say, by the Supreme Court. This is not one. This is one that the Article 3 branch doesn't want to have much to do with, and that Congress and the president are going to have to work this out. I think there is room for movement. I think there is. I'm probably being hopeful here, but as the COVID-19 situation subsides, which prayerfully I hope that happens soon, then then there will be an opportunity for us to come back into these very controversial issues such as immigration. But if it happens, which I pray it does, I hope it does, and working toward it to happen, it's going to happen as the result of folks like Congressman Cuellar being informed by folks that are close to the work, Mayor Saenz and others, to get this done in Washington, D.C.
Well, thanks, John, for that perspective. And I want to use your last comment as sort of the jumping off point to follow up first with Congressman Cuellar and then Mayor Saenz about immigration policy. Our audience is, of course, very smart. They may not know the details, Congressman, of what you believe would be the ideal immigration policy. So the follow-up question for you is to sort of spell that out for our audience. You know, what is missing in our current immigration policy that either you've been working on or you anticipate working on in the future? And then, Mayor, when I follow up with you, it'll be from your perspective as a mayor. What are the problems that come from the absence of that policy? Congressman?
Thank you. And let me start off with one point that I think is key. You know, some of the toughest issues that we faced have been bipartisan. In fact, let me give you two examples. The last time we had a immigration reform was in 1986, Ronald Reagan and a Democratic Congress. The last time we had a surplus as a blue dog was under Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. We had a surplus because they worked together. We had immigration reform in 1986 because they worked together. In my opinion, a immigration reform package should be comprehensive. We can either do it together, which is the ideal thing, or we can take piecemeal. Right now, there's some folks that just want to do border security, and border security. But I think there's three parts that we need to look at in any full immigration reform. One is border security, sensible border security, and how do we secure the border? Number one. Number two, we should have some sort of guest worker plan that works to address the needs of the U.S. Anybody that an American that wants a job, you know, certainly they go first. But if there are vacancies in certain areas that they don't want to do, for example, my father was a migrant worker, and it's a very hard job. And first, give it to the Americans. And if the Americans don't want to do it, then fill in that space. And then the third thing is what do we do about the 11 or 12 million undocumented aliens? Now, I don't believe in amnesty, which is what happened in 1986 under President Reagan and the Democratic Congress. But I think we need to do something by the 11 or 12 and have some sort of pathway. And how we get there is something that we can debate. So every immigration reform should have three things: border security, a guest worker plan, and number three is what do we do about the 11 or 12 million undocumented people that we have? The people that should stay here, let's find a pathway to them, and how we get there is up to debate. The people that should not be here, I think we need to remove those individuals, but that's something that we need to look at. So there are ways in addressing that. But if you look at the history of, and I'll close up with this, when you look at immigration history, immigration reform, and there's been a lot of it in the United States, unfortunately, there are some people that take that and turn it into a very personal type of experience. And it becomes very emotional, and it becomes very hard for members to do immigration reform. And I don't want to go into examples in our history in America, but we've seen how certain people were treated, whether they're Germans, the Irish, the Chinese, or the Hispanics. Over a period of time, there's been this backlash against certain people in the United States. So it's an emotional issue, I understand, but somehow the members of Congress and the senators need to rise above like they did in 1986 and do a immigration reform in a bipartisan. And that's the only way we can do something that will be lasting, is if it's bipartisan. So we can go into details about border security and other things, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what I think immigration reform should look like.
No, and I think that overview is helpful because just thinking about news shows, regardless of the channel, when there are conversations about immigration, they tend to be in 3 or 4 minute snippets. So regardless of who the host is, who the guest is, they sort of start on second base, assuming that all of us in the audience know what the speaker believes in terms of immigration policy and what's at stake. And so that's point number one. Point number two, Mayor, I'm going to rely on you to fill in for us. We're big believers here at the foundation that policy needs to be looked at from what I like to call the sidewalk level, from the people who are going to live it on the ground. And so I'm really curious, given your vantage point in Laredo, about the effects of America's immigration policy, which I think the four of us agree is broken and deficient. How does that affect not just your job as mayor, but the average person in Laredo going about their business? We know that it's going to be affected, that commerce, thankfully, is going to be across the border. That's something that we love as Texans. Give us a kind of your bird's eye view about the impact of this deficient immigration system.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I'll give you the bird's eye perspective here in Laredo, Texas. Well, basically the border, we represent the border region here, the South Texas area. Yeah, let me put it in context of a population where Laredo alone is about 270,000 people. We're 96% Hispanic. I calculate, although we don't have a hard number for this, that we easily have between 20,000 to 40,000 undocumented folks that have been here for years. And I say easily 20, 25 years. These folks have now married and have children. They're US born children here. So there's a mixture now of undocumented family members with US citizens as children, as family members. So the family unit is impacted. These people, the undocumented, live under the shadows, as we know, and they've done that for years. And that presents a problem. So is comprehensive immigration reform needed? Absolutely. This is something that I, as a mayor, have been pushing for years. Well, the last 6 years that I've been mayor here in Laredo, Texas. And I can venture to say, if you ask anyone here, they're absolutely in agreement that we need bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. But of course, when you get to the Washington sphere of politics, all of this is leveraged out. Some way, somehow, it's connected to some other ideology or want from either party, and it gets distorted. And of course, it never gets worked out. And it brings us back to where we're at now. We do need border security. It's absolutely, we're patriots as well. We see the need for that. Human trafficking, drug trafficking occurs. So that's got to be an essential component of that. As far as the economy, as I've stated before, our economy locally here is driven easily 50, 60% by the Mexican shopper. So some way, somehow that has to work out for them as well, where they're permitted to come shop. As far as people here, the 11, 12 million, got to take in mind also to the dreamers, the DACA. That for us, I think, and based on what I hear coming out of Washington and Austin, that's low-hanging fruit. That ought to be taken care of sooner rather than later. But if, as by way of a piecemeal approach, as the congressman I alluded to, but if it's through that bigger package, whichever way, I think that's it has to be resolved. Now the others, we can go back and forth. I'm agreement with a congressman, Cuellar, guest worker programs. There's certain jobs that we've heard, and I think there's research out there that our people won't bother, won't take. Maybe it's beneath them. It's these dirty jobs that people primarily from Mexico and other countries may take. For them, it's a step up, and we ought to take advantage of that too. Keep in mind too, we have this demographic winter that's out there. U.S. citizens aren't being replaced. fertility rates in our mothers is approximately 1.9 children per mother, a female, and I think we need 2.1% birth rate to replace ourselves. So we're below that. So we need workers, we need consumers. The economy needs people working and buying and purchasing, and that's the way it works. So there's an amplitude here to consider all of this in this comprehensive immigration reform package. And it's prime, and it's been prime for years. But again, the politics distort this, and nothing gets accomplished. Our people need help. They need relief. No one wants to be living in the shadows of afraid of Border Patrol coming and distorting the family. And for me, I'm big on family, the family unit. So some way, somehow, if they don't become U.S. citizens, maybe through a family emergency where the actual family members can support the people that are here. If there's a fear that they may take U.S. jobs, some way, somehow, it has to work, but all around the family unit. And it doesn't have to be an extended family as well. The parents, possibly maybe a grandparent, if they need to provide some assistance to the U.S.-born children that may need grandma or grandpa there, helping out with child rearing when they're out in work. But again, not taking any U.S. jobs and not taking also any public assistance. All of this could be worked out. I figure we're all, intellectually capable, able to figure, and I think we can. But what stops us is politics. This bickering. But I guess that's part of the democratic process. Thank you.
Well, it is. It's a messy process, but one thing America has been blessed by in every generation, just to give our audience some hope, is statesmen. And this is an issue that's going to require that. Probably nothing is going to happen, I would speculate, between now and November 3rd because of the nature of politics. But I can tell you here at the foundation, where we do nonpartisan work on immigration reform. John, in fact, heads up our Border Security Coalition, which I'll have him speak about momentarily. We're gearing up for what we hope will be a solution to this finally next year. And that's something that every American has a vested interest in from every vantage point, whether it be fiscal or your eloquent concerns about family members. We have an overriding concern about the rule of law, not for the sake of turning people away, but for the sake of making it transparent and easier to get here. This foundation certainly is pro-immigrant and pro-immigration. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this wonderful place we call Texas. But it's about time for the politics to catch up with those needs. So I really appreciate what y'all have said. So Mayor and Congressman Cuellar, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question about immigration, and then John Hostettler, I'm going to turn to you about a COVID-related question. And this follow-up question is about the wall. I mean, this is something a lot of our audience members are concerned about one way or the other. I, along with John and some of our other colleagues here at the foundation, had the privilege of taking a multi-day tour of the border some months ago. And we visited with property owners, local officials, the Border Patrol agents. And the Border Patrol agents talked about this triad of controlling the border: personnel, technology, and infrastructure. And obviously the wall would be part of that infrastructure. Correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that you, Mayor, and you, Congressman Cuellar, are not the biggest fans of the wall. Just an honest kind of public policy think tank question. If it's not going to be the wall, what is going to take the place of the wall in that infrastructure? Congressman?
Yeah, okay. Look, let me give you the premise that the president or some of my colleagues use for having a wall. Stop drugs and stop people, correct?
Right.
That's the premise. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Well, listen, first of all, as the mayor said, look, we believe in law and order down here at the border, but we believe in certain things that are important to us: private property rights, the making sure that nobody believes in open borders. I don't believe in open borders. The mayor doesn't believe on that. So the question is, how do we secure the border to do those two things: drugs and people that are coming in. Let me give you figures from Homeland. Let me give you figures. If you look at, most people say, oh, there's all this people, hordes of people coming in through the border. I'm trying to quote some of my friends. All these people that are coming in from the border are coming in. All these people are coming in. But if you look at the figures, in the last 7 years, consecutive years, most of the people that are coming in into the United States are visa overstays. Visa overstays. That means they came through some sort of permit legally. They flew, they drove through a bridge, came by ship or by airplane. And when you look at those folks that are coming in, the number one violator of those people that are here without proper documentation are Canadians. Canada is the number one violator of visa overstays. Now, as I told my colleagues, I dare you to call for a wall in the northern border. Because if you want to stop people, most of the people coming in are visa overstays, and Canada is the number one. Those are the numbers. Those are the numbers. And these are numbers from the Department of Homeland. Then the other thing you say is, look, we want to stop drugs. And they mentioned fentanyl, and they mentioned other drugs that are coming in. Again, I'm giving you numbers from Homeland, CBP. If you look at the drugs that are coming in, the ports of entry, 89% of the drugs that they stop coming into the United States are stopped. Cocaine, 89% of that is stopped at the bridges, the ports of entry. If you want to talk about, that's for cocaine. If you want to start about heroin, 84% of all the drugs are coming in, cocaine coming in or heroin coming in, are stopped at the ports of entry. That means that 11% of the cocaine will come in between ports of entry. That means that 16% of the cocaine come in between ports of entry. If you want to stop fentanyl, which is a horrible drug, they're all horrible, 92% of all the fentanyl coming to the United States are stopped at the ports of entry. That means only 8% of it is stopped in between ports of entry. If you want to talk about stopping meth, 81% of that are stopped at the ports of entry, and 19% of it is stopped at the in between ports of entry. So if you want to stop drugs, and we want to stop all the drugs, you have to see where most of the work or most of it will come in, and that's the port of entry. So we need to make sure we have men and women in blue, which are the CBP officers at our ports of entry, and we want to make sure that they have the right technology. Now, when we talk about the walls, sometimes you hear, well, our men and women in green, Border Patrol, and as you know, there are 3 uniforms out there. The blues are the ports of entry, CBP. The greens are Border Patrol, and the tan are the Air Marine. Those are the 3 uniforms we find at the ports of entry. And if you want to stop that, you got to understand where they're coming in. The men and women, I always say when they say, well, our men and women in green will say that they want a wall. And I always ask this question, was it pre-2012 or post-2012? Because pre-2012, the men and women, the unions for the Border Patrol, were saying that the wall was a ineffective waste of taxpayers' money. New union members came in after 2012 and they took a different position. And if you ask every Border Patrol chief, and I've asked this from Bush to Obama to Trump, how much time does a wall buy you? That is, slow down somebody. They all have said this under Trump, under Bush, under Obama. These are the Border Patrol chiefs. Quote, a few minutes or a few seconds. So are we going to spend $25 million a mile to put a fence, given all those figures I just gave you? Or are we going to spend, let's say, $86,000 to have AI, artificial intelligence, towers and technology that's worked very well for the Border Patrol, for the military, and the new technology that we have that can work. We now have sensors, the linear equipment that you can put underground. They're so good that it can tell if it's a car passing or it's a deer passing, an animal or a human being. We have now AI technology that the artificial intelligence will direct the camera. So instead of having a National Guard or a Border Patrol sit there for hours with a joystick, now you have artificial intelligence. And are we spending the money the right way? Some years ago, I was in Afghanistan with my friend Michael McCall, and we saw the aerostats. And the aerostats, as you know, work very well for the military. So I asked them to use that equipment. Both of us asked them to use that aerostats because they had been there were surplus military equipment. They got brought down over here, took Homeland 2 years to tell us, they said, we got to see if it works down here at the border. Without due respect, if it works for the for the military in Afghanistan, Iraq, then it certainly should work for us. 2 years to figure that out. Then what they did is they paid a vendor paying over, some of them over $5 million a year to run up the aerostats and bring them down. And the Border Patrol will be the ones that will be looking at the cameras. Waste of taxpayers' dollars, good equipment paid by the taxpayers. But this is what we're seeing. We need somebody who understands that when you play defense, and I'll use football as an example. Do you play defense on the 1 yard line if you want to use football as an example, or would you rather play defense on their 20-yard line? Well, we play defense in the U.S. on the 1 yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border, where we spend over $19 billion, billions of dollars on the 1 yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border. We ought to be smarter and better and extend our perimeters, work with the Mexicans, work with Central America, and play defense out there instead of playing defense on the 1 yard line and spending billions of dollars. So as the mayor is going to say, look, we don't believe in open borders. We want to see law and order, but we just feel that it's important that we protect private property rights and the environment. And again, why are private property rights different in your area or in the northern border? But if you're a landowner in South Texas, your private property rights don't count at all. And I don't think we ought to be hypocrites and respect private property rights in every place. So down on the border, we want to believe in, we support law and order. We just feel that there's a better way of doing this.
Okay. Well, thanks for that thorough response. Mayor, I want to give you an opportunity to add anything you like, and then we'll begin our pivot to audience questions.
Yes, thank you so much again. Just following up on the congressman. Let me say this. We're not a sanctuary city. We truly believe on the rule of law. We welcome federal presence. We have Border Patrol, CBP, ICE, name it, FBI, and we would like to have more of them because it's good for security, but also good for the economy, local economy. Those are good paying jobs, and we want those kind of jobs here. But more importantly, we want their presence to collaborate and work with our local law enforcement officials as well. The police and sheriff and constables. And we have a very good network of good working relationship with them, and we want to maintain that and increase that as well. And we also too, through the auspices of the congressman and others, we've been able to get a Air Marine. He mentioned Air Marine as well. Air Marine has a presence here, and we need them. So they're also enlarging a facility here. So the bottom line is, we want federal presence. We're truly patriots. It's a matter of how you approach border security. And of course, our policy here in Laredo for years has been no physical structures. We would rather have virtual wall technology, people, boots on the ground, clearing the river edge of vegetation and so on. So that's been approached, but of course things are a little different. The federal government is moving with their wall, and they're pursuing that hastily and vigorously. So we'll see what time will bring. But of course, exactly what the congressman stated is it's been our policy for many years.
Well, thanks for that. I can tell you from here in the People's Republic of Austin, where we're cutting police funding, it's refreshing to hear a mayor of a major city talk about wanting more law enforcement. So thanks for that. John Hostettler, just a quick follow-up for you, although it's a very important topic, but I just want to get to a couple of audience questions before we conclude. Based on your experience in Congress, your perspective as a policy leader during this time of the COVID pandemic, how has all of the realities of COVID affected trying to get some kind of immigration reform done?
Well, it is heightened our sense of what's going on, especially in Texas. And I just wanted to briefly talk about an issue that is evolving that directly impacts Texas. And the New York Times did a pretty large piece just a few days ago, talking about the fact that 5 South Texas border communities from Brownsville to Laredo have the highest new infection rates, and that 4 of those, unfortunately, are suffering the highest death rates in the country. And couple that with the real world interaction that CBP officers have with folks that come across the border in that area, and the fact that 10 CBP officers have perished as a result of infections from COVID. One particular story about an officer who passed away after dealing with, I believe it was 5 or 6 individuals who had crossed the border illegally. He noticed they showed signs of infection with COVID, and as a result of his personal interaction with them, physical interaction and others, he ultimately himself contracted, well, he did contract the disease from that interaction and ultimately died. His death being directly related to that interaction. And the administration is in the process of reinforcing the southern border with somewhere between 400 to 1,000 CBP officers from the interior. Now, we're not hearing a lot about that, and I don't know why that is, because this is a very important issue, and the whole country, it directly impacts Texas, and Texas is bearing the brunt of this. But we all know that Texas will not contain this. I guess I should say the individuals in Texas that come across that are infected may ultimately make their way into the interior. And so it's important that we understand that there is a developing story, that this issue has to be addressed, and it will probably impact the future debate on immigration policy generally. The lessons that we learned, unfortunately, from this pandemic that stretched not just across the country, but across the hemisphere and impacted us, and especially Texas, so tragically.
Thanks for that, John. So what we'll do is move on to a couple of audience questions before we wrap up at the top of the hour. And first one is about human trafficking. So Congressman, I'll pitch this to you, Congressman Cuellar. This audience member asks, what role does human trafficking play in the discussion about immigration and border security?
You know, certainly human trafficking is one of the activities that the criminal organizations will use. The last time I was at the border of Guatemala and Mexico, I was with a general by the name of John Kelly, that, as you know, became the president's chief of staff. And we were talking about how those organizations will control the routes from certain areas into the United States. Sometimes they will pass drugs. Sometimes they pass human beings that are being smuggled or trafficked. And so you got to understand the way there's, I call them drug cartels, but criminal organizations look at. We will have certain, we will have people that are trafficked or smuggled in for sex reasons. But keep in mind that even within the United States, we also have that problem also. So not all of the people that are trafficked come through international ports of entry, or should I say through the international borders. It's a problem that we have inside the United States. And certainly we see that at our international crossings or international borders also. And this is something that we need to spend more resources to stop trafficking, whether they originate somewhere else or whether they originate here in the United States.
Thanks, Congressman. We'll move on to a question for you, Mayor Saenz. And this audience member asks, if we're doing a better job stopping smuggling at ports of entry and a worse job outside ports, shouldn't we step up enforcement and barriers outside the ports?
Absolutely, and this is why the congressman and others have been pushing for more employees, more Border Patrol folks, which we've gotten in the past, and I think more are coming. And of course, technology would serve a huge need to prevent that as well. Again, it's border security. We're all in favor of that. We want a strong, secure border. We need to work with Mexico as well too, for them to do their part as well. They need to take responsibility, and I think they've been trying to, and I think they've demonstrated that with our president, especially at their southern border. So it's a collaboration. It's a mixture of things, and hopefully we can get there. Currently, the need is there, and so we need to address it more aggressively.
Thank you. John Hostettler, one of our audience members, also asks, and I'll just pitch this to you in the interest of time. Let's say if someone wants to come here legally, what does the process look like? If we can achieve the bipartisan reform, we can have this coalition that transcends party lines. It's early 2021, realistically. What does that process look like from your vantage point, from the vantage point of the Texas Public Policy Foundation?
Well, early on, when TPPF took up the issue of immigration, one of the first research projects we did was to look at successful merit-based systems in Canada and Australia, where, interestingly enough, those countries get federalism better than we do here in the United States, which is, as someone who appreciates federalism, gets my hackles up a little bit. But I think we need to understand that not all parts of the United States have the same requirements for immigration, and that ultimately, when we move down this road after securing the border, that we look at a system that resembles that of possibly Australia, Canada, other merit-based systems, whereby we've asked a very important question that I think is somewhat lost on us to date, and that is, what is the best interest to the American people and to the United States of America, and how will the entrant of the next immigrant, the next legal permanent resident, otherwise known as green card holder, next citizen, how will that benefit the United States of America? How will that benefit the people of the United States of America? And when we do that, I think we will have adjusted our perspective appropriately.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate all of the answers to questions from me, from our audience members. Obviously, as y'all know better than most, this is a topic that we could spend hours, if not days, talking about. But unfortunately, we've gotten to the end of our time. And so what I would like to do is pitch you each one last question, the same question. It's sort of our custom in this live stream amid all of the challenges of 2020 to end on a high note. And I just want to ask each of you for final thoughts that are hopeful, sort of encouraging, optimistic even for our audience members as they themselves are navigating being an American in 2020. Congressman Cuellar, we'll go to you first.
First of all, we're all Americans, and we need to make sure that we work together as Americans. We are Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and other folks. But first, we got to keep when I say we're Americans, keep the words of using the great Texan LBJ, who said, he said, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Texan, and I'm an American. But what he was emphasizing, he says, but first, I'm an American. Question is, did he really say I'm a Texan first? But he said, I'm an American, I'm a Texan, and then I'm a Democrat in that particular order. And I think if we put America first, that will get us to what we need to do. I'm an optimist. I believe in our beautiful country. I believe in our country that, that got started so many years ago, and we got to make sure that we protect our Constitution, protect our basic values, protect our basic principles that make this country the greatest country in the world and in our history. So again, let's keep working together as Americans and do what's in the best interest of our country. Thank you so much for hosting us today.
You're most welcome. Thanks for being part of it. Mayor Saenz.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Roberts, and of course the two congressmen for allowing me to share my thoughts and possibly my values as well with you all, and of course the public that is viewing and listening. Yeah, from our end as well, we truly have to consider ourselves Americans. We're patriots. Thank God, the vision of our forefathers was to have a diverse country, and guess what? We are a very diverse community, country, and we need to live that way. And we have to respect each other. Yes, there's differences in cultures and ideologies, but yet, back to what the congressman said, the Constitution controls rules, the rule of law controls. And if we want to do something different, then the laws need to be changed. And this is where the democratic process enters into it, and we have this back and forth. But ultimately, we are Americans, and we're blessed. We're beyond blessed. Who else but us? Where people, died to actually come into our country and want to achieve the American dream. So we need to keep that in mind too. We're truly, truly fortunate and blessed. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor, for taking the time amid, I know what is a busy schedule, given everything on your plate, for being with us. Really appreciate it. John Hostettler.
Well, I believe that this event today informs us of how this is going to be. We're going to arrive at this solution, and that is just to remind our audience, Kevin. Congressman Cuellar and Mayor Saenz have come here voluntarily, and they have reached across at least ideological lines to a certain extent on some of these issues, and it's going to be as a result of the work of an organization like TPPF, Texas Public Policy Foundation's work, working with policymakers, opinion leaders, political leaders like Congressman Cuellar and Mayor Saenz, who are going to ultimately arrive at the solution to this very complicated, vexing issue. And as long as we are able to sit down in forums like this and talk about these things and air out our differences, we're going to come to a solution to these problems, these very difficult problems. And I appreciate very much the congressman and the mayors being here today.
Well, former Congressman John Hostettler, it's a pleasure to work with you, and thanks for being part of this panel. For all of you on the panel, Congressman Cuellar, Mayor Saenz, John Hostettler, thanks for your time, for your wisdom. I know that our audience appreciated your willingness to take on a difficult topic, and I would just say personify how we can go about the discussion, even with some policy differences among us, in a way that we hope is very fruitful. That's what makes me optimistic about achieving immigration reform in the near future. For those of you in the audience, thanks for tuning in, as so many of you do each week. We're always interested in your ideas for future topics. We have many, many ideas for guests, like the wonderful ones we had today, have many ideas for great topics, but of course you can always contact us at texaspolicy.com to pass along your thoughts. Gentlemen, may the Lord continue to prosper the work of your hands. You're doing really important work, not just on this issue, but others. Thank you. And may all of you who've tuned in today take great care. May God continue to bless this great country. Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank you.